I'd like to call the January 14th special called meeting of the Forsyth County Board of Education to order. The members have an agenda before them. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
A motion by Mr. Usherwood, a second by Mr. Grimes. All in favor? Unanimous. Welcome, everyone. We're going to stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and we will pause for a moment of silent reflection. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a special called meeting of the Board of Education, and there is a single topic on the agenda today, and that is the board consideration of the opt-out for House Bill 581, which is the statewide homestead exemption. Mr. Larry Hamill, our CFO, is going to have a presentation for us on the subject.
And before he does, may I chime in here for just a second? Just wanted to set Larry up, explain where we're at today and why we're here at a called meeting instead of at a regular meeting. We are now under legislation that was passed in the previous session. One is House Bill 581, the other was House Bill 717. Both involve caps on floating homestead exemptions that cap reassessment values. Larry will get into the details of that in just a second. We're under two of those. One was statewide, one was locally developed. The local one has no option or no opportunity to opt out of. However, the statewide one, there is a mechanism to opt out of it. And a lot of counties, a lot of school systems around the state are wrestling with that right now. And our situation is we've got one cap. This is a second one that was passed. And we've got one time, the way the legislation is written, a one-time opportunity to opt out. And after that, by March 1st, from January 1 to March 1 of this year, if you don't use that time period to opt out and follow a very formalized process that the legislation maps out for us, then you've lost any opportunity to do that in the future. So we felt like it was very important, and as we timetabled backwards from where we'd have to be at March 1st, as well as to get ads in the paper and all the other things of a timeline that we'll share with you here tonight, we needed to call this as a called meeting to be able to get on track with the timeline that we're going to propose to you tonight. And again, I think it's really important, everything that Larry shares, everything that I'm sharing tonight, we're not going to ask you at the end of tonight to vote on opting out of anything. What we're going to ask is authorization for us to proceed with the process of an intent to opt out, but that intent won't be exercised until we have a chance to explore this with our community, share with our community, and go through multiple hearings with public participation input before we're asking you to make that decision later in February.
And if I can add a little bit of color, and then I'll get out of Mr. Hamill's way. I think it's important for the public to understand this is already kind of a nuanced, ambiguous issue that most people don't know very much about. So it's already a bit confusing to begin with. But I want to just provide some history. In 2023, February of 2023, the Forsyth County Board of Education issued a unanimous resolution asking the General Assembly to impose a 4% homestead exemption on us. So we volunteered out of our own willingness to have this 4% imposition placed on our digest. That was because several years prior to that decision, we saw record increases in assessed values and people's tax bills were going up 20 and 30% in 1 year. So it became clear that something had to happen, and we are the heavy hitter on the tax bill. So this board took it upon itself to do the right thing and ask for that 4% homestead exemption. Because of the timing of things, it ended up on the ballot in 2024, almost 2 years later. In the intervening time, the General Assembly passed another homestead exemption, which is now statewide. The first one is specific to our county. The second one is statewide. We'll get into the details behind, the pros and cons, but I just want to be clear that what the board is considering is not no homestead exemption, one of two homestead exemptions. So any outcome here will result in a homestead exemption for the community.
Yeah, we're under a 4% cap here on out for the next 10 years regardless. It's just a matter of the statewide one. Hi, Larry.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Tonight, we're going to discuss the House Bill 581 as well as local House Bill 717. We always think about the governance goals for our school system and when we talk about any activity that affects both financial and how the school system operates. So our current status, to show that we are good stewards of the financial status for the school system is, for the 8th year in a row, we've been a 5-star efficiency school system, and we continue to hold a AAA bond rating, one of only 6 school systems in the nation that does that. Our current millage rate is 15.208. It's the lowest it's been since 2009, and it's been dropped the last 2 years. The debt millage is down to 1.418. We dropped that 3 years ago by a full mill. We already have a cap for 65 plus for school property tax exemption. We already have one cap in place. A new cap, either with the state or the local, would be at the second cap we have. Forsyth County voters passed House Bill 717, as Mr. Valdez just talked about, which would put an annual cap of 4% on reassessment of home values. So just to dive into the 717 overview, Board of Education worked closely with the local delegation to craft the bill. That House Bill 717 did pass, and it's going to take effect as of January 1st of this year. It applies only to the county schools, no other government within the county. It's a 4% annual limit on reassessment of homes. This does not count for any of the property tax categories, or does it count towards any new growth. There's no opt-out opportunity once this goes into effect of January 1st of this year. We're under the guidelines for this. It does expire in 2035 with a sunset law. That allows us to go back and reevaluate how the 4% affects us before we go forward as a community to decide what we're going to do after that. Now, the House Bill 581 overview we're going to talk about is the House bill that was passed by the state and by the voters of the state of Georgia. That bill as well takes effect January 1st, 2025. It also has an annual increase cap. The difference is the annual increase cap for that is the CPI, and we'll talk about that more. Now, the interesting thing about 581 is not only does it apply to us, but it applies to all the other municipal governments within each county. It has only a one-time opt-out opportunity, which means we have to have that process completed as described by Mr. Young, and have to have the information to the state by March 1st. And there is no expiration date on the state cap. So what we want to do is just show you an estimate of how the cap is affecting us. So if you go from left to right, you'll see the first column is the tax years, and that's not fiscal years, but that's actual tax years. As you can see, the 40% value of the property tax homestead went from $10 billion in 2017 tax all the way up to almost $22.3 billion in 2024. You can also see the differences in terms of how much increase from year to year happened. Now, the next column is the percent increase between the years. So we'll start with 9.86% from the 2017 to 2018, all the way to 7.58 between 2023 and 24. Now, as Mr. Young said a few minutes ago, we had the two anomaly years in 22 and 23, where we saw increases of 21 and 24%. And that first year, 22, we kept the millage rate the same. The next year, we dropped it by 2 full mills, and then in 24, we dropped it again by 0.092. Now, if we look at the cumulative effect of how House Bill 581 and House Bill 717 would affect us, you can see that starting with 2018, working through 2024, the net cumulative effect for House Bill 581 would be $75 million. The interesting thing is the 717, which would be the local House bill, actually returns $76 million to local property taxpayers, about $1.2 million more than House Bill 581. Now, what I would like to point out, though, is if you start with House Bill 717 with the 2018 difference, the difference there would have been $4 million. Now, the 4% cap, because it's constant and because of the way the property tax breakdown happened over the years, you notice that it went to $5 million in 2019, but the next 2 years, the 4.81% for 2021 and the 4.42% for 2020 was a total increase in the tax digest. But that made up growth as well as other categories. So the actual breakdown was less than 4% those particular years for the reassessment portion of the tax increase those years, which means we had no effect for those 2 particular years, which means that over a 4-year period, the actual decrease under the 4% cap would have been about $5 million to our local property tax under House Bill 717. It's not until the 2 anomaly years come along that you see the huge increase on how it affects 717. I honestly believe if we had had a normal year going forward between 4 and 9%, there would have been increases those years, but nowhere near the extent to what it was for those 2 particular years. Now, if you look at the 5th column over, you'll see House Bill 581 CPI for previous years. And you'll see that the rates start from 2.1 and work their way up all the way to 8% in 2023, as well as 4.1% in 2024. Those rates come from the Georgia Department of Labor website that was brought to our attention by Corey and a person named Tim, that came up with the original spreadsheet that was presented to us at Gasville Convention last November.
And that's from our counselors, our attorney's office when he refers to Corey, just so we know who we're talking about there.
So this is their best guess at what they think the CPI would be. Right now, the way the law is written for House Bill 581, all it states is that the Georgia Department of Revenue will make the decision on CPI. We don't know if that CPI is state-based. We don't know if it's regional-based. We don't know if it's nation-based. We don't know if they're going to go out and pull it from state authorities, federal authorities. We just don't know how they're going to pull that data. It's left completely up to them to make that decision.
Hence, the title of this slide is estimated. So, and I think that's important to note to anybody that's watching this is this is the best we had to go by an estimation was that particular inflationary index.
Now, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to describe why I feel personally as the CFO, even though 717 costs us a little bit more money, that in the long run is better for us as a budgeting purpose and in terms of how we look at things. So when we dive into 581, one of the concerns we have about 581 is Department of Revenue makes the determination, but we're not sure how they're going to make that determination with their CPI. That's a little foggy. Also, if there's a political agenda to how that CPI is made, we have no control over it, versus the state where we have control, or local where we have control at 4%. And we're not sure how, and that we're also know that the CPI was in no way is it going to be tied into local economic realities. If Forsyth is growing dramatically and the rest of the state's not doing well, then we're going to be kind of hurt by that CPI number. The other thing is that CPI will fluctuate. It would make my job a lot more difficult to figure out the revenue source if I have to kind of take a guess at what it's going to look like, not knowing. The other problem we're worried about is how much of a tax delay it's going to make with the local tax commissioner's office. If they've got to wait every year to get a number from them, and I'm not sure when that number will be presented to them, that could push out the time necessary for us to get the budget completed, presented to you, and to get the document signed, allowing us to do the tax impact statements to everybody who owns homes here and there in Forsyth in order to get the money back from them. This past year, it was pushed back about a month. We didn't get a lot of our money until November. It got our reserves down pretty low. We are at the point where if it went on another month, we would think about have to try to get a loan in order to cover our cost flow in terms of the expenses we have. The other thing is this has a very short window for 581 in terms of opting out of it. The deadline is March 1st. We've already started January 1st. The way the law was written, you couldn't officially do anything, add or anything until after January 1st. The other thing is there's no expiration date. So if you sign into this, you're basically at the whim of the state until they decide either to get rid of it or something else changes down the road. Now, with the House Bill 581 opt-out requirements, there's a couple things we have to be aware of. All the documents have to be submitted to the state by March 1st. I personally will take all the documents signed, drive down to the Secretary's office, and I'm going to walk in the office and give it to him. I don't trust the mail or anybody like that right now. I want to make sure that I put it in somebody's hand, take a picture, smile with them, post on Instagram or something, and take care of it.
We're also going to have a backup of all those documents. If you've seen Larry's driving, sorry, Larry, go ahead.
I'll take a cab.
Sorry.
We have to have 3 public hearings. One of those hearings has to be between 6 and 7 p.m. I don't know if they've provided to you yet, but we do have a timetable of what that would look like. The ads must appear 1 week prior to each hearing. Typically, right now, we plan to have the ads 10 days before each hearing. They have to be prominently displayed, no less than 30 square inches. The paper is aware of that. Also, the paper is aware they can't be in the legal section. They have to be in the front of the paper near the common area. We will also, under Michelle Dugan's guidance, have website advertisement language as well as a press release.
So let me just jump in here right now, and you never want to get ahead. I haven't been a superintendent that long, but long enough to know you never want to get ahead of your board. But I just want to state here, in a situation where you decided to, yes, go forward with this, authorizing me tonight to go ahead with the process, we had to go ahead and reserve some ad space and have things ready to go in the event that you say yes to us tonight, in terms of going forward with the process. So that's why Larry said we've talked to the people, we've got space reserved, we've got formalized legal language we have to use. But we needed to make sure that we presented this to you publicly before we got ahead of everything.
As you can see, today we've been talking about House Bill 581. We do have a reservation for the 18th paper for the first ad. We have one for the 25th for the second ad. The first public meeting would be on January 28th, which is a Tuesday. The third ad would be February 1st. By the way, all these ads are the weekend paper that come out on Friday, Saturday, just FYI. The second meeting would be February 4th. The last meeting would be on February 11th. Both of those, again, are Tuesdays. And then on the February 18th regular board meeting, we would ask for you to go ahead and approve for us to opt out and sign the necessary documentation. And then the next day, I wouldn't wait until March 1st, but the next day I'll be driving down and turning all the paperwork in. This is just an example of what the ad's going to look like. There was very, very specific language written into the law in terms of how the ad had to look. Any questions?
Larry, can you go forward one slide to the concerns? Well, maybe one more. Whatever you had the concerns for 581, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, that if we did not opt out of 581 and we went with the 3%, that could really delay us both in establishing a budget, because we would have to wait for a number to be published by the state or by somebody else.
Correct.
And not only would it delay us in establishing our budget, which has a whole downstream effect that I see.
Well, the way Mr. Grimes, the way the budget process is, we go ahead and get the operating budget started in November. So that's typically done by the end of January, beginning of February. We pull salary and benefits activity in there. We talk about what allotments we have to assign. We talk about potential jobs we want to add central office. I make all those adjustments, I put it all together, and the expenditures are ready. Then I go look at the revenue side. Now, property tax is almost 50% of our budget, so I can pretty much figure the other 50% out on my own. But if I only have 50% of the revenue, and I don't know how the other side of the revenue is going to go up, and typically I could say, okay, I'll just throw last year's number in there as a beginning number, then there's going to be that gap we have to worry about. And that gap would say, I could say that gap means I have to have a 4% increase, a 5% increase, or 6% increase, or only a 2% increase. But then at that point, we have to play the game with what's the CPI number going to be. So if it comes back greater than that, we're fine. And we can make a decision how we want to go forward. If it's less than that, that's when we have to sit down and start talking about what's the first things we're going to take out of that budget that can be taken out within the least amount of consequences to what the school system can do.
And I think you just answered my question, that, not knowing that, not having that consistent number every year, like the 4%, how that could have some downstream effects on just how we plan locally.
Well, if I have the 4% number already in advance and I can play with calculations, that allows me to sit down with Mr. Young and Mr. Derek Hershey and say, hey, these are constraints in terms of what the revenue source is going to be. We can make decisions ahead of time before we even present anything to you for the initial draft to say, we've already taken all that consideration, which makes the process a lot faster and smoother.
So I'd like to kind of break things down into little bites that the public can understand a little bit easier, because this is overly complicated. The biggest message I want to drive home to the public is no matter what, at the end of this decision-making process, there will be a floating homestead exemption on the school portion of your taxes. HB 717, which we unanimously developed locally, including our legislative delegation, our senators and our representatives, was crafted for us. We studied its feasibility. We came up with a game plan. And when you look at this budget that we just approved a few months ago, the local increase in that budget was 4.3% because we worked toward the goal of the 4% cap. So we've proven that this 4% cap is safe for us as a school system because we want to be good stewards. We want to be fiscally responsible. We want to have mercy on the taxpayer and not take more than what we need. But we also don't want to bankrupt our school system or put us in a situation where we're drawing down cash reserves unnecessarily or having to have big increases in the millage rate, which people are not going to like. We get new students every year, between 1,000 and 1,200 on average the last few years. That's a middle school's worth of kids every single year. Each and every one of those is adding a fixed cost. So our budget grows every year because our county continues to grow every year. So while we wanted to be fiscally responsible and be good stewards to the taxpayer, we don't want to find ourselves, in my opinion, we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're in a variable revenue stream that there's years where it's flat. There's been years where it's negative. So what are we doing on a year of negative CPI? Are we raising the millage rate? Because we know we're adding kids, right? So we sought to strike the balance of eliminating these wild swings in people's tax bills, which I think the 4% cap achieves, but doing it in a way that doesn't put our system in financial peril. So I'm personally very comfortable with the 4%. I think it's a good solution. I think it's safe for our school system. And most importantly, I think it protects the most important asset in this county, which is our schools. So that's my 2 cents. I think we have a solid plan for the 4%. We deliberately built in a 10-year sunset period because we don't know what this is going to do. So we wanted to have an exit for future boards if, this didn't go the way that we thought it was going to go. The statewide would lock us into a highly variable, unpredictable, permanent situation that we have almost no control over. So I feel very apprehensive about that kind of setup. I see that bill, frankly, as a bill that was crafted for systems and governments that weren't doing the right thing. And I think we did the right thing, and we asked for the homestead exemption. And I'm very comfortable with the one that we crafted here locally.
As am I. But at the same time, we've got 3 new board members that are new to us, that we want to have that time to be able to walk through this. So, potentially you end up with the same confidence in this that Mike and I have for having been here while House Bill 717 was put together. This gives us time to do that. It also, very importantly, allows us the time to hear from our community, not only to hear from them, but at each one of those hearings, Larry will present, he'll present basically what he did tonight, although we're all open for feedback from this is the first audience to hear this besides Larry, Michelle Dugan, Josh Lowe, and myself. So any feedback you have that makes it easier to understand will be openly accepted so that we can make sure that we message this the proper way to our community.
All right, so not hearing any other questions or comments from the members, so anything else, guys? No? No? Don't tell me I don't let you talk. I'm giving you the opportunity. So I think at this point, it makes sense to move forward in the agenda. So just to be clear what we're being asked here today, what we are authorizing or not authorizing is for the system to move forward with the timeline that they've presented and essentially to inform the public of our intent to opt out of the statewide homestead exemption. There will be 3 hearings. This information and more will be presented. There'll be an opportunity for the public to come and speak and say what they want to say. We'll consider whatever is discussed in those 3 meetings, and then there will be a vote where we will actually opt out. So we're today authorizing the process to move forward, and ultimately we'd vote to authorize the opt-out. Any questions on that process? All right, so if there's a recommendation from the superintendent?
I recommend to the board authorization be provided to our staff to move forward with the opt-out process on House Bill 581.
All right, the members have heard the request from the superintendent to authorize moving forward with the HB 581 opt-out process. Is there a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
A motion by Mrs. Hoyes, a second by Mr. Grimes. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, that brings us to the end, unless anyone would like to do a small performance, perhaps a short story or a haiku? No? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I second.
Oh, good. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry and Michelle. Thank you for being here, Travis.
We got one cup.